Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin, Tjong-Alvares with the news from the global economy. On today's show, Libyan oil plays a central role in the split country, and Gaza's reconstruction remains stalled as Hamas stays at odds with Fatah, Israel, and Egypt. First, the headlines. The long-suffering ruble on Tuesday remained weak following its biggest one-day fall since the 1998 financial meltdown a day earlier. The Russian currency continued to trade near a record intraday low of 53.9 rubles against the dollar. The ruble has depreciated nearly 60% against the dollar since the start of this year due to collapsing oil prices and Western sanctions. Pressure is mounting on the Bank of Russia, which let the ruble float freely last month to dip into its foreign currency reserves and prop up the ruble.
When the economy is on its knees in Russia anyway because of the fall in the oil price, combine that with potential rate hikes down the line, that is really bad news for Russia. That could really decimate the economy going into 2015 and beyond.
Germany, France, and Italy are pressing the European Union to tighten curbs on tax havens, calling for concrete steps by the end of next year. The countries call for new measures to ensure greater transparency and hinder companies from taking unfair advantage of Europe's divergent tax laws. In the wake of the financial crisis, pressure has grown on European countries to stop using loose tax laws to attract corporations. The campaign hits amid controversy over European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker's tax policies during his tenure as Prime Minister of Luxembourg. Hundreds of business owners demonstrated in Paris on Monday to protest hefty taxes, charges, and stifling regulations. The protest by owners of small and medium-sized businesses underlined a general sense of decline in Europe's second biggest economy. France is struggling to lift itself out of feeble growth and growing unemployment while resisting EU demands to reduce its budget deficit. Though the government has promised to cut payroll taxes if businesses take on new hires, there has been no turnaround so far.
This is not a question of the right wing or the left wing. I support business, and I don't give a damn about left and right. What we want is for our leaders to always remember business, to free us so we can work. Don't forget that business alone creates wealth and jobs.
Germany's biggest airline, Lufthansa, scrapped more than 1,300 flights from noon on Monday as pilots launched a 36-hour strike. In total, some 150,000 passengers are hit by Germany's 10th pilot strike in 2014. Strike action, including by airport staff, has so far cost the airline more than 170 million euros. Pilots union Vereinigung Cockpit called the strike as talks broke down in a dispute on transitional pension arrangements for about 5,400 pilots. Libya's oil industry, like its government, has been split between different authorities that claim leadership over the country. And as its economy relies heavily on the oil industry, accounting for 95% of total exports, much rides on the global price of crude. Here's the story.
Libya has been the scene of violent turmoil since the Arab Spring, sparked in 2011, took hold there. And since August, two competing governments have been in a power battle, which forced the elected Prime Minister Abdullah al-Thani to find refuge 1,000 kilometers to the east of Tripoli. The conflict has left international oil traders in a conflict of their own, with no clear understanding of who owns Libya's oil, the largest reserve in Africa. Now Libya's self-proclaimed Prime Minister Omar al-Hassi has warned that any rival attempts to take control of the country's vital oil industry could lead to a deepening conflict there, forcing the country to split into two.
In the beginning, we didn't want energy sources to become part of this conflict. We wanted relative peace on this front. We thought the conflict could be simple and that it would be a political one inside the Libyan territories or in one part of Libya.
The warning came after the rival government took responsibility for airstrikes on Tripoli's airport last week. Despite their exile from the capital, al-Thani's government in exile is the internationally backed side. Still, authorities in Tripoli have taken over ministries and oil facilities, going so far as to appoint a new chair of the National Oil Corporation.
The international community is supporting the continuation of illegitimacy, allowing the rival government to remain. The situation was further complicated once organizations such as OPEC became part of the conflict.
Al-Hassi says that the international community's support of his rival and declaration of its own NOC chair in the country's east would be the last straw.
The current proposal helping to create a new oil company means helping to break up Libya.
Oil prices have dropped by 40% since mid-June, and OPEC's indecision late last week, leaving its output cap at 30 million barrels per day, has added to that decline. Despite the lowering of the price of oil, its importance in Libya remains at an all-time high.
We're joined now by Ayman Siksak for a discussion of the uncertainty over the Libyan oil industry in Financial Bazaar. Mr. Siksak, thanks for joining us.
Good to see you, Binyamin.
Good to see you too. So, can you tell us, how has Libya's oil industry fared since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi?
Well, really, it's an issue of certainty. When Gaddafi was toppled in 2011, one thing was absolutely for certain. Libya's $10 billion a year oil industry was brought to an almost complete halt.
Right.
Almost nothing was produced. Now, over the recent years, and certainly the recent few months, it's been fluctuating again. In October, it was reported that almost 1 million barrels a day were produced there. Last month, it was produced that half of that was estimated to be produced there. And the thing is, no one knows who is controlling the oil fields right now. We know that militia took over one of the main oil fields, but then the government claimed it has taken it back. So really, it's raising an ethical question for the people who are still buying oil from Libya. And there are. Who is this money going to right now? And that's really a huge part of the uncertainty over the Libyan oil industry right now.
So how is this split in authority, so to speak, affecting Libya's ability to export? I mean, is it affecting Libya's ability to actually export as well?
Well, actually, Libya is lucky because its oil is considered the best crude oil out there, and it's one of the main exporters in OPEC. So actually, people who are buying oil from Libya have not been affected whatsoever. They're not deterred by the fighting and the continued turmoil. And even though there are estimates that the money is basically going to militia that's controlling these oil fields,
right,
money is still coming in. People are buying this oil.
Still, they weren't really considered in the recent OPEC meeting, right? I mean, like, they weren't considered in terms of the supply drop or cut. Like, the decision there was not really part of Libya's concern.
Absolutely. Well, that's because there's been a huge drop in production. I mean, even though almost 1 million barrels were produced in November, that's still a far cry from what Libya used to produce.
So, I mean, what effect do you think the drop in oil production in Libya would have, considering that the centrality of the Libyan government here in the economy, so to speak, the oil in the economy? What effect would it have on the ongoing drop in prices?
Well, I think the ongoing drop in prices is not going anywhere. We're still going to see prices dropping again and again, even though Libya has estimated that it will see a rise in the income from oil prices. We have to remember that these estimates are not accurate. They're basing them on around $80 a barrel, and we know that by the time these estimates will come in, the numbers will be much lower.
Okay, so Libya doesn't really have to worry so much, despite the fact that it's split between two different governments, about the oil price going down, or, you know, the crude price going down.
Specifically about the oil, it doesn't need to worry. Countries are still buying a lot of oil from Libya, as much as it can produce. Libya does have other worries, though, on its mind, and they are trying to develop their own industries right now, much like Iran, to avoid dependency on oil. But unlike Iran, it's not been very successful so far.
Okay. Well, Mr. Siksak, thanks for joining us. Please do stick with us, actually, because we have another report that I would like to get your comments on. Reconstruction in Gaza following the summer war between Hamas and Israel is sorely needed. But ongoing incitement of terror attacks on Israelis and the failure of the unity government with Fatah keep Israel and Egypt wary and borders closed. More in this report.
Rubble, shelled-out buildings, lives left in ruins. The scars of Israel's 50-day bombardment of the Gaza Strip this summer are still all too present. Palestinians are eager to get their lives back on track. But the Israeli blockade has kept the pace of reconstruction painfully slow. Building materials as well as basic necessities once transited through tunnels running into the tiny enclave from Egypt. But most were destroyed by Israeli bombs.
The tunnels have been completely shut down, and they were the only way to bring in 50% of Gaza's needs. We imported by tunnel over $300 million worth of basic goods like cement, gravel, and iron materials.
It's now a huge challenge to rebuild the 80,000 homes damaged in the July-August war. Some materials are getting through from Israel, but barely more than a trickle.
The quantities that are coming in aren't enough to build a single building. All of the materials that have entered from Israel will not build one building.
The National Economy Ministry says 35,000 construction workers are out of work, a dire situation when about 63% of Gaza's youth and 40% of the overall population have no job. It has a ripple effect on all parts of the economy here. Goods coming in from Israel are more expensive than those that came through the tunnels from Egypt. But with fewer jobs, budgets are tighter than ever, causing the economy to crumble too.
I was buying a pack of cigarettes when the price was $1, and now the price is as high as $3, sometimes as much as $5. I have to buy less cigarettes because there's no work, and I can't afford it.
Oxfam says that 80% of Gaza's population depends on humanitarian aid to survive, feeding a never-ending cycle of poverty and discontent that plays into the hands of extremists.
So, Mr. Siksak, based on that report we just saw, how much aid does Gaza need, and how much has it been pledged?
Well, Binyamin, let's start with the good news.
Right.
$54 billion have been pledged for the Gaza reconstruction from countries all around the world, from the U.S. to Europe to countries in the Arab world. A lot of money.
Right.
Now, this will have also a massive effect on unemployment in Gaza. People will be working in construction, but we just heard recently that nearly half of that will not be used for the actual reconstruction. Only half this amount will be used to actually physically reconstruct Gaza. The other half, we don't know for sure. We know that Gaza has suffered from infrastructure problems, sewage problems, network problems.
Right.
Maybe they'll use it for that. Of course, the fear is now that maybe some of this money will get to Hamas. Maybe the tunnels will be rebuilt. So there's a lot of anguish.
Is there no more fear that the money might actually go to pay off Fatah's bureaucratic costs? Is that no longer a fear, considering that the union government has fallen?
Well, right now they're still putting up faces as though the unity is still there, even though Abbas has attacked Fatah publicly several times.
Right.
But I think for Israel, at least specifically, the main fear is still that the money will be used for terror, basically, purposes against Israel. Now, the not-so-good news is that, just like we saw in the report, the Palestinian housing minister said that Gaza needs about 8,000 tons of cement every day to keep up the construction at a timely manner. But Israel is letting in about 2,000 a day.
Right.
Now, according to him, he says that at this pace it will take 3 decades, 30 years for the Gaza reconstruction to be complete. Not great news. And, there's also many political motives here ongoing.
Right. Now, considering that a lot of the construction materials were brought in, smuggled in, if it were, through the Egyptian border.
Right.
What role does Egypt play today in ensuring that those construction materials come through, or is it really just the Israeli border where the majority is going to have to come through?
It's definitely the Israeli border where the majority is going to have to come through. Egypt, actually, in this recent conflict, has been insistent on not taking a part in this. They closed the Rafah-Gaza border, and they wanted really no part in mediating between Israel and the Palestinians anymore, for various reasons, not just letting in materials through the border, but also not really mediating between the parties in political terms.
Right.
So Egypt is trying to...
They have their own sorrows, so to speak. And
absolutely. And this is part of Sisi's policy at large of not being accountable for the Palestinians or Israel and their conflict anymore.
Right. Now, considering all of that, based on the terror attacks that we have seen in recent weeks, and presuming that they are actually related to Hamas, to what extent can Hamas circumvent politics, whether it be with Fatah, with Israel, or with Egypt? To what extent is it going to have to compromise on politics to ensure that it can get the building materials that it needs for Gaza?
Well, I think right now the only reason we have to be happy about and slightly encouraged about is that Hamas has no choice right now. Gaza is in shambles. Hamas has no choice but to cooperate with this operation and allow the materials to come in to actually reconstruct Gaza. The people of Gaza need the reconstruction to happen. They're frustrated, they're angry, and part of them are blaming Hamas for that. So both on Israeli terms, Hamas needs Israel not to attack it anymore,
right,
and it needs the Palestinians to be on its side as much as possible. So at least in the foreseeable future, I don't think Hamas will be causing issues in terms of the materials coming in through the Israeli checkpoint.
Okay, well, Ayman Siksak, thank you so very much for joining us and giving us some more clarity on what to expect in coming weeks and months. Thank you. That's the end of our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at i24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Thanks for watching and join us again tomorrow.